In the vast grasslands of North America, there was a time before horses. Imagine endless plains stretching to the horizon where tribes of the Lakota, Comanche, and Cheyenne hunted bison on foot. Hunters ran for miles, carrying heavy spears, chasing animals far faster than men could ever sprint. Survival depended on endurance, not speed. Villages moved slowly, dragged by dogs pulling travois. War parties advanced on foot, vulnerable and weary. Life on the plains was hard, measured by limits of human strength. Here's the catch. Everything changed in the 16th and 17th centuries, when horses arrived with Spanish expeditions in the 1500s, first along the Rio Grande. Spanish explorers brought them across the ocean. They never imagined the animals would escape into the wild. But escape they did, and in the grasslands they multiplied. By the 1700s, horses spread like wildfire across the plains. For native peoples, it was as if the land itself had given them wings. But here's the twist. At first, horses were strange and terrifying. Tribes had no tradition of riding animals. Early accounts described warriors hesitating to mount, unsure if this four-legged creature could truly be trusted. Yet once they learned, there was no going back. The plains would never be the same. You wouldn't believe this. A skilled rider could hunt bison 10 times more efficiently than on foot. Where once hunters had to creep close and risk injury, now they charged alongside the herds, releasing arrows at full gallop. The kill rate soared, food security improved, and hides for clothing and shelter multiplied. But new power always brought new rivalries. Here's the painful irony. The same animal that gave freedom also drew conflict. Horses became wealth, status, and power. Tribes fought over herds. Raids grew frequent, brutal, and bloody. The horse was both gift and curse, survival and struggle. Picture this. Before horses, moving a village took days. With horses, travois grew larger, lodges bigger, migrations faster. Entire encampments could now cross distances in days that once took weeks. Whole nations became more mobile, following bison across seasons. Yet mobility also meant vulnerability. Faster travel brought larger wars, more sudden attacks. Horses rewrote the map of the plains, and tribes either adapted or fell behind. By the 1800s, European settlers looked at the horse nations with awe and fear. They saw warriors who could fire arrows at full gallop, hitting targets more accurately than a musket. They saw armies of mounted Comanche sweeping across Texas, Lakota raiders thundering down on wagon trains, Cheyenne hunters leading massive bison hunts. Horses had turned the plains into a battlefield of speed and thunder. So here's the cliffhanger. How did horses reshape not only hunting and warfare, but entire ways of living? What insights, scientific, cultural, and social, lay hidden in the bond between human and horse, a bond that changed history more than gunpowder itself? At first glance, horses looked like tools of transport, swift legs replacing tired human feet. But here's the catch. The real insight was deeper. Horses didn't just carry people. They transformed the entire relationship between native nations, the land, and survival itself. Think of the bison, the beating heart of plains life. Before horses, a hunt was risky and exhausting. Hunters crept close, then sprinted after animals that could weigh a ton and run 35 miles per hour. Success meant days of meat and hides. Failure meant hunger. But with horses, the hunt changed overnight. Riders could keep pace with bison, maneuver alongside them, and strike with arrows at full gallop. The odds of success multiplied, the danger dropped, and the scale of harvests expanded. Here's the twist. The ecological ripple was enormous. Herd sizes were managed more strategically. Tribes could follow migrations and harvest sustainably. Horses also allowed hunters to transport far more meat and hides back to camp. What once took dozens of people carrying loads on foot could now be hauled in a single trip with pack horses. Some records suggest a single pack horse could carry 200 pounds of meat, work that once took several hunters on foot. The plains food system became not only faster but more reliable. But here's the strange part. Horses didn't only affect hunting. They reshaped warfare. A mounted warrior could travel 5 times farther in a day than a foot soldier. Raids became lightning strikes, fast and unpredictable. Defense required new strategies, new alliances, and new vigilance. Tribes that mastered horses became regional powers, their influence stretching hundreds of miles. The Lakota, Comanche, and Crow rose as dominant nations, in part because of their mastery of the horse. You wouldn't believe this. Anthropologists estimate a Comanche raiding party on horseback could cover 60 miles in a single day. They struck settlements with a speed European armies could barely comprehend. Horses gave tribes a strategic edge that made them formidable foes even against firearms. Here's the deeper insight. The horse was not just an animal, but a cultural revolution. For many Plains peoples, horses became woven into identity, ceremony, and status. Wealth was measured not in coins, but in herds. Songs and stories honored great horsemen. Even winter counts, historic pictographs, often marked great horse raids or famous steeds. Feasts and dowries included the gifting of horses. Spiritual traditions saw horses as sacred beings, carrying prayers between earth and sky. And here's the wow moment. Modern science confirmed this transformation. Studies of skeletal remains showed changes in diet and mobility after horses spread. Villages became more dispersed, covering wider territories. Trade routes expanded, connecting tribes across thousands of miles. The horse literally redrew the human map of the plains. So what started as a strange, foreign animal became a partner that revolutionized hunting, warfare, mobility, and culture. Horses were not an addition to plains life. They became its center. Which led to the next question. What tools and practices emerged from this partnership? How did tribes design saddles, bridles, and methods that turned a wild animal into the heartbeat of a civilization? That's the story we uncover next. If insight revealed the horse as a revolution, the next question was simple. How did native peoples turn this powerful animal into a daily partner? Here's the catch. It wasn't just about riding. It was about tools, methods, and inventions that reshaped life on the plains. The first tool was the saddle, or rather, the absence of one. Early riders used nothing more than folded blankets or pads of buffalo hide. This gave them balance and closeness to the horse, but little comfort. Over time, plains tribes developed a simple wooden frame called the pad saddle. It was light, stripped of heavy leather or stirrups, yet strong enough to anchor a rider at full gallop. Here's the twist. Without stirrups, balance came from muscle and skill. Riders gripped with their knees, leaned low along the horse's neck, and fired arrows with uncanny accuracy. Then came the bridle. Some tribes used rawhide nosebands or ropes looped around the lower jaw. Others crafted bits from carved wood or bone. But many preferred the hackamore, a simple rope halter that gave gentle control without metal. The horse responded not just to reins, but to shifts in weight, taps of heels, and the pressure of a rider's body. Communication was fluid, almost telepathic. You wouldn't believe this. Spanish records describe native riders firing arrows beneath a horse's neck while at full gallop. They controlled the animal entirely with their legs. In battle, this turned the horse into both shield and weapon, a moving fortress of flesh and speed. Here's the strange part. Transport changed as much as warfare. Before horses, travois poles were dragged by dogs carrying maybe 60 pounds. With horses, the load jumped to hundreds of pounds. Some accounts note a single horse could haul 200 to 300 pounds, 5 times more than a dog travois. Larger lodges could be built, winter supplies could be moved quickly. Families grew less tied to one location, more able to follow herds. A single horse could carry an entire household across the plains. Other tools emerged in daily life. Ropes of rawhide were braided into lassos for catching stray animals. Children were given colts to practice riding from a young age, turning skill into second nature. Even horse painting became a tool. Symbols drawn on flanks with clay or ash to protect in battle, to mark victories, or to call for speed. And here's the unexpected tool: breeding itself. Tribes learned to manage herds, selecting strong stallions and hardy mares. Some bloodlines became famous. The Comanche prized nimble horses for raids, while the Lakota favored endurance runners for long hunts. Horses were not just ridden, they were cultivated like living technology. The social tools were just as profound. Horses became the currency of Plains life. A man's wealth was measured by the size of his herd. Horses were gifted in marriage, exchanged in diplomacy, or seized in raids. A warrior who returned with stolen horses gained prestige equal to a battlefield victory. In this way, the horse was both coin and crown. You wouldn't believe this. Some raids targeted not people, but corrals. A single successful raid could bring back dozens of horses, instantly changing a family's fortunes. Winter counts recorded these events with bold images: circles for corrals, lines of horses led away in triumph. These practical inventions merged with ceremony, turning everyday gear into sacred objects. Here's the deeper craft: medicine and spirituality. Horse gear was decorated not just for beauty, but for protection. Saddles bore carvings, bridles hung with feathers, manes braided with charms. Shamans blessed herds before great hunts. Songs were sung to colts at birth, weaving them into the spiritual fabric of the tribe. So the tools of the horse nations were more than wood, rope, or hide. They were skills, symbols, and systems. Together, they turned wild mustangs into allies, wealth, and warriors. And that led to the next step: behavior. How did these tools play out in daily life? What did it look like to grow up in a culture where a child might learn to ride before he could walk, and where every dawn began with the whinny of horses outside the lodge? That's the story we explore next. If tools gave shape to horse culture, behavior brought it to life. Here's the catch: the horse nations were not just people who owned horses. They became people who lived with horses day after day in every part of existence. Picture a morning on the plains. The first sound was not always the cry of a baby or the crack of a fire. It was the whinny of horses tied near the lodges, snorting steam into cold air. Children ran to brush them, learning to feel the warmth of their hides, the rhythm of their breath. By the time many boys and girls could walk, they were already lifted onto colts, encouraged to balance, to laugh when they fell, to climb back on again. Riding became as natural as running. Here's the twist: mobility transformed daily patterns. Entire encampments shifted more often. Families packed lodges onto travois poles dragged by horses, their loads 5 times heavier than before. Entire villages could cross distances in days that once required weeks. This changed diets because people could follow migrating bison more closely. It changed shelter because larger lodges could be moved without struggle. Even winter survival improved as supplies traveled with greater ease. But here's the strange part: horse care itself became ritual. Families fed their herds with cut grass, watered them at rivers, and kept watch through storms. A man might rise at dawn not for prayer, but to check the herd. Herds became as precious as kin, guarded with vigilance. Some families counted dozens, even hundreds of animals, wealth that required round-the-clock watch. You wouldn't believe this. Some accounts describe children practicing horsemanship games. They raced bareback across open prairie. Others practiced shooting at targets while leaning sideways off their mounts. These games were more than play. They trained reflexes, courage, and unity. By adolescence, many riders could guide a horse with only their knees, freeing both hands for bow or lance. Here's the unexpected rhythm: warfare changed not only in scale, but in style. Mounted war parties could ride 40 to 60 miles in a single day, strike suddenly, and vanish just as fast. Raids often targeted horses themselves, since stealing herds could cripple a rival. Defense required vigilance. Horses were tied close to lodges at night, warriors posted guards, dogs trained to bark at strangers near corrals. Horses were no longer just tools of battle. They were the very price of battle. Ceremony and culture absorbed these behaviors. Feasts included the public gifting of horses. Courting rituals involved a young man showing off his best mount. In battle, painted patterns often carried meanings: zigzags for lightning speed, dots for hail to strike the enemy. Warriors decorated horses with paint before battle, turning each into a living canvas of prayer and protection. Even mourning involved horses. Families might sacrifice or release a beloved animal to honor the dead. And here's the deeper part: behavior with horses reinforced values. Patience in training a colt taught patience in life. Sharing horses with kin taught generosity. Guarding herds taught responsibility. The horse nations were not only shaped by horses, they used horses to shape their children. Imagine this: evening on the plains. The sun dropped low, lighting grass with gold. Horses grazed near camp, bells tied to their necks, chiming softly. Families sat by fires, listening to elders recount raids, hunts, and journeys made possible by the animals nearby. Children fell asleep to those stories, dreaming of gallops across open prairie. So daily behavior with horses was more than survival. It was education, ceremony, and community. Horses carried not just riders, but entire cultures. And that led to the next chapter: the benefits. What did horses ultimately give to the plains peoples, beyond speed and power? How did they change health, economy, and identity? That's where we go next. If behavior showed how horses were lived, benefits revealed why they mattered so deeply. Here's the catch: the arrival of horses was not just an improvement, it was a revolution that touched every corner of life on the plains. The first and most obvious benefit was food security. Mounted hunters could bring down bison far more efficiently than before. A single rider could harvest what once required a whole party on foot. With horses hauling 200 to 300 pounds of meat each, families returned to camp with abundance. Drought or scarcity still threatened, but starvation became less frequent. Here's the twist: horses expanded mobility, which in turn reshaped survival. Villages could follow herds across seasons with speed and precision. Migrations that once took weeks were completed in days. Winter camps were stocked with more hides, more meat, and more firewood. Archaeological digs at former wintering grounds reveal thicker layers of bison bone deposits after horses spread. In a land of extremes, this meant resilience. But here's the strange part: the horse gave not only sustenance, but status. Wealth was counted in herds. A man with 50 horses was rich. With 100, he was a leader. With more, he was legendary. Horses became dowries in marriage, tribute in diplomacy, rewards in ceremony. Prestige and generosity were measured by how many horses one could give away. You wouldn't believe this. The horse also amplified trade. Plains tribes could travel further to exchange goods, linking corn from the Mandan with obsidian from the Rockies. Even shells from the Gulf made their way north. Horses were traded themselves, moving from tribe to tribe until even nations far from the plains adopted them. The animal became a thread, stitching together distant economies. Here's the deeper benefit: military power. Mounted warriors were faster, harder to surprise, and deadlier in combat. Horses turned the Comanche into what some historians called the Empire of the Plains. The Lakota expanded westward with horse-borne strength. Smaller tribes allied or fell under pressure. Horses were not only tools of survival, but engines of dominance. Painted in bright symbols for war or draped in beadwork for ceremony, horses stood beside warriors in legend as well as in life. To many plains peoples, the horse was more than an animal. It was a gift, sacred and irreplaceable. So the benefits were clear: food, mobility, wealth, trade, power, and meaning. Horses gave more than they ever took, which led to the final chapter. Beyond survival and success, what did horses mean as legacy? How do they still shape native identity today? That's the story we close with next. The story of the horse nations was not just about speed or conquest. Here's the catch: horses reshaped entire civilizations, and their legacy still echoes today. When colonization pressed westward, the very power that horses gave became a double-edged sword. Mounted warriors slowed expansion for generations. Yet in the end, the frontier rolled on. Tribes that once thundered across the plains were confined to reservations. Herds were seized or slaughtered, culture was suppressed, and yet horses remained. Families kept them hidden. Others tended small herds as reminders of freedom. Here's the twist: the horse became both symbol and survivor. In powwows today, painted riders circle the arena, reviving traditions once outlawed. Young riders reenact hunts in pageantry. Their regalia sparkles, their mounts painted with lightning and stars. Horses that once carried warriors now carry dancers, storytellers, and descendants proud of their lineage. But here's the strange part: the horse is also a bridge to science. Archaeologists traced its impact in bones and campsites. Historians read its story in treaties and travel logs. Even ecologists noted how mobility reshaped hunting patterns, leaving measurable marks on landscapes. Satellite surveys still reveal older grazing trails and camp rings that trace the paths of horse-powered migrations. A sacred partner became part of the scientific record. You wouldn't believe this. In some native languages, the word for horse translated as big dog or sacred dog. This naming wasn't diminishment, but respect. Horses slipped into a worldview where animals were kin, not property. They were treated as companions in a shared struggle to survive. Here's the deeper message: the horse showed how cultures adapted and endured. What began as a foreign creature became the beating heart of plains identity. And even after conquest and loss, that bond persisted. Today, youth programs teach riding as heritage. Ranchers of native descent honor old bloodlines. Songs still rise, hooves still thunder, and the horse nations are remembered not as relics, but as living communities. Paint this picture: a rider at sunset, horse silhouetted against wide prairie sky. It was not just an image of the past, it was resilience, still alive, still galloping. So the conclusion was clear. Horses gave food, mobility, power, and meaning. But their greatest gift was endurance. They carried entire nations through change, and they still carried memory today. Here's the lasting call: preserve indigenous knowledge, respect the bond between people and animals, and listen to the wisdom that endures. The story of the horse nations reminds us that survival is not domination, but partnership, with the land, with the herd, and with each other. As long as these stories are told and these traditions practiced, the heartbeat of the horse nations never fades. The horses are still here, and so are the nations.